Mr. Speaker, I will hopefully be brief. I rise really to support the government's amendment and to make it clear that I believe making great pace in getting ourselves through this process and into the negotiations is the key for whatever the government does now. I think the one thing that most people, including the opposition, fail to define is what is actually leaving the European Union. They keep saying that they won't and don't want to frustrate the will of the British people, and they say that that will mean that they don't want to delay Article 50. But then in the same breath, with respect to the honourable gentleman who speaks for the opposition in this matter, they then go on to qualify what actually leaving means. In fact, if I listened to what he said, I actually got the definition that he doesn't actually want to leave. He wants to be members of everything that we're in as members now, but with one or two small changes. So in that sense, I think the purpose of what they do speaks more, and I want to come back to this in a second, about their own problems rather than about the negotiations which this government has embarked on and will embark on once we activate Article 50. I made no bones about it. I voted and campaigned for the UK to leave the European Union, and I again believe that it is necessary for us to understand what we mean by that, define that, and then act on that, as some of my colleagues have already said. Leaving the European Union at its basis principle means we are no longer subject to European law. From that flows the other elements that were debated during that process. First, that the public most clearly wanted to take back control of their borders with the European Union, and they wanted to take back control of what happens to their money that is raised by taxation. But those cannot happen if we are subject to European law. So this is the key element. Leaving the European Union means we are no longer subject to the jurisprudence of European law. And that is really quite important. The failure ever to accept that on the other side means that they're not really in favour of leaving or even have accepted that we are leaving. They are debating how we stay in with modifications. And therefore, I want, on that principle, to remind the Centre for Social Justice published a report about why people voted to leave, and there they made it very, very clear in a publication called 4852, and even many of the Remainers said the same. They wanted control of migration, and they wanted sovereignty returned. And I was quite surprised by them using and agreeing to the phrase of sovereignty. We're always being told in this House that nobody out there cares about sovereignty. It's an esoteric issue only debated here amongst obsessed politicians who can't get away from the fact that nobody talks about that out in the country. But in fact, this is the key element that they all agreed they wanted, and I took from that, which is take back control, the phrase that we use endlessly in the course of our debates on this matter. So with that very clear, and therefore we are clear what they wanted, when people say we don't know what they wanted, it's simply not true. I think they do a disservice to the general public that they can't understand what they mean when they voted to leave the European Union. I think they were very clear about that. And then I've heard the Liberals go on about the destination. They voted to leave, but they didn't vote for a destination. Leaving is a destination because it means you are in control of yourselves. This country is not moving, it's staying where it is, but we no longer become subject to European law. So playing silly games like that doesn't help anybody believe fundamentally that politicians understand what they're going to do. And so with that, therefore, it is no point for us in any of these negotiations to try and ask the European Union for something which they simply cannot and will not give us. And this is the main bit. There is no point going to them and saying, we want to be out of the European Union, we're going to be free to make our own laws, but will you let us stay in the single market, and can we stay in the customs union as a point of special pleading? I can understand those of my colleagues who want to stay in those elements. I fully understand that. I think that's a wholly reasonable position to be in. But if we are leaving the European Union, staying in those two things, I do not think stands. And more importantly, I wouldn't want to be, because again, that brings us under control of the acquis communautaire, and that is one of the main principles for leaving. And the second element, I think, and the opposition asked for enough detail, and I think enough detail is that the strategic aim is on these points. And the second element of the customs union, I come back to the simple point. Why would the United Kingdom want to stay in a customs union when one of the key elements that is important on making that important decision to leave the European Union is we get back the opportunity to make our own trade arrangements in other countries. I mean, I'd rather we stayed in than stay in the customs union, because it seems completely pointless to me to actually embroil ourselves in the customs union, go through all of this rigmarole, arguments and debates and rows, only to find at the end of the day there is no jewel in the crown at the end, which is us making free trade arrangements. And I might say to the House, quite interestingly on this point, that I discovered the other day in the House of Representatives there are now no less than 5 elements of legislation, 3 bills I think and 2 amendments to bills, going through both houses, the Senate as well, actually now paving the way for a free trade agreement with the United Kingdom. So much for the existing President's view that we'll be in the back of the queue. It appears that the legislators in Congress see us wholly at the front of that queue. And they know the reason why. Because we are the great free trading nation of the world, and we believe in free trade, and that is where we want to take both ourselves, by the way, and I hope many others with us as well. So I think the rest of the debate, once you get through that and of course understand that relevance, I think for us it's really a case of process. So I listened very carefully to the honourable gentleman as he spoke for the opposition, and I understand deeply the problem that the opposition has right now. We were in opposition ourselves for a number of years and often divided. I was leader, even so, I remember it very well. I know, and it's like herding cats when you're in opposition, and there are a lot of cats sitting on the benches behind him, and they are divided about what they actually want. And the reality is, for many of them, they are exposed into a simple position of not really wanting to leave, but recognizing that 70% of them now sit in constituencies that actually voted overwhelmingly to leave. So they are now actually focusing on the fact that they run the risk politically of being in danger at the next time that an election is called. And so I understand fully their need to try and somehow confuse the issue with this particular agreement to the amendment. But the point I make to the honourable gentleman is, the amendment is very clear. It actually sets a date by which Article 50 has to be invoked. So by not voting against this amendment tonight, the Labour Party has given to the government a blank cheque to go forward and invoke Article 50 without any real caveats. Now, I'm wholly in favour of that, I have to say, because I'm supporting the government. But I didn't think the Labour Party was supporting the government, and I welcome them into that position, although some of my colleagues, honourable friends, absolutely deplore them for doing it. And I see from some of the shaking of their heads that many on their own benches deplore the weakness that they seem to have shown.